So, what do we do to help with these challenges? We kind of rethink our desktop strategies with virtualization. So, a couple of things here when you look at virtualizing those workloads and, using some kind of EUC solution to deliver those out to your end users, you're going to lower hardware and operational cost, right? So, for example, that's going to be more on the data center hardware, which we're going to get typically a longer life cycle out of, especially with a lot of enhancements coming through software nowadays. But also too, that's going to help with your operational costs because you're centralizing everything and not having to go out and touch lots of endpoints where you're doing things now in the data center. And like Benjamin said, when the CrowdStrike incident happened, they were able to roll back those base images in that environment quickly. Just a matter of doing like a reboot and getting those back up. Whereas physical devices, they're having to touch those and go through a lot of challenges to get those back online. And then scalability as well, being able to quickly scale up and scale up easily. So, for example, you can get more. If depending on how you're sizing your environment, you might have the extra capacity and already planning for that. Possibly moving things over to your DR environment for temporary capacity as well. Or I'll talk about how you can use one of our offerings, our Nutanix Cloud clusters, to easily burst into the cloud to be able to have that temporary capacity when you need it in case there's some kind of event, and then scale that back down once you're past that event. And then security as well, as new features are coming out. And we'll talk about how Windows 11 added new security feature requirements that Windows 10 and previous versions didn't have. A lot of these things are done in software. So, typical software updates can help add these new features like, the trusted platform module. But on the virtualization side, it's going to be called the virtualized one. So VTPM, secure boot, and then virtualization based security, things like Credential Guard and the Windows subsystem for Linux. And then simplified IT, right? So again, since everything is centralized, everything is right there where IT has great processes and management of those, it is going to help that with easier upgrades and faster recovery. Again, back to Benjamin's example, just roll back the image and you're back up. But also too, we have things that we're already backing up, snapshots, backup software, self-service snapshots as well, if it's just certain data. So you have all those functionalities quickly built in when you bring things back in the data center. And then sustainability, right? So if we're getting longer life cycle out of the hardware because software is adding features that we don't have to rely on hardware for, we're getting that life cycle extended. Then also too, that's going to reduce e-waste. And then there's things, if we have shift workers or the way we're doing our data centers, that can also help with reduced energy and keeping our carbon footprint lower.
Yeah, and tying a couple of those things together and what you're talking about with bursting and NC2 in Azure, the scalability, not just scaling up, but scaling it back too when you no longer have that need. If you've got seasonality into your business or you had a sudden growth and you're trying to figure out what's the long-term process going to be for this and what do we invest in for the next 3 years, but we got to deal with something right now. If you go out and buy 1,000 laptops, those are yours. Those are a fixed asset that you have to then maintain for those next 3 years. Whereas if you've got a solution that you can expand out, but then you can contract back, then you can lower those costs for the long term and then right size that once you kind of get a grasp and see what that steady state's going to be. I mean, you may need to burst out to 1,000 for the next 3 months, but it may only long term be 200. At that point in time, you have 800 endpoints that you have to figure out what am I going to do with them? How am I going to use them? And then the cost is on the books either way.
So we do have a question here from Kevin here saying most of my company uses laptops. How does Nutanix handle portable needs? It all depends how you define portable. Now there are some cases where you're not going to completely get rid of laptops for those high mobility users that may have to have an offline use case. But for most of us, the users who actually work from like either from home or from the office, or we kind of roam around where we're actually in a location to where we can use like a low cost thin client to access like a virtual desktop. So Nutanix can help by hosting that infrastructure for that and be able to allow users to come in and have that remote session. Now, that's going to be the best case if the users are always online or have some kind of connection. That kind of goes back to what EUC is great for, that any use case, kind of anywhere, any device type model. But if you're in a use case where it's going to be highly offline and portable, that's where you might have to look at those use cases and still have a device in hand for that user base.
Yeah, and you also, I mean, think about two like contractors, third party associates that come in. Is does your organization want to be responsible for providing a device for that person, and how long are they going to be on contract for? And then also to their productivity, because now if you're saying, hey, you have to use my device to work on my stuff, then they're essentially changing their processes in order to support your organization, and you may not get that full value. Plus, just them saying, great, now I need to carry two laptops around to do my job. So those are other types of situations where having, again, options available to you to where you can provide whatever that resource is in a timely fashion, in the most appropriate fashion, helps both your organization, both just internally as well as its interactions with its other vendor partners.
So talking about Windows workloads, and yes, we have the Windows Server workloads as well, but the focus today is on the desktop side. So primarily out there in the landscape, majority are still heavy on Windows 10. Yes, there's some who've already started the transition to Windows 11. But Windows 10 was pretty straightforward. It didn't require any extra features security wise. Yes, you could use UEFI and that kind of stuff if you wanted to, but all that stuff was optional. There weren't any hard requirements as far as security settings on the device or a virtual machine to be able to use Windows 10. But we're coming to the end of the road with Windows 10 in October of this year. So that's going to transition to Windows 11. And Windows 11 does require extra security features like UEFI as part of the BIOS, secure boot, the trusted platform module on hardware or in virtual, the VTPM. And those are required to run. And then you have things like Credential Guard, which adds extra security, but is optional. But the main thing to run Windows 11 is that device has to meet the requirements, has to be able to have UEFI, secure boot, and some type of TPM, whether it's virtual or physical. Now, there is talk about Microsoft possibly relaxing some of the requirements around TPM, but that's hasn't come to pass yet. And so we're still in these requirements that we have right now before us.
Yeah, I mean, on those, excuse me, some of those requirements, they're not going to go away because they're all security related. So now is a perfect time. If you haven't planned your transition or you're at the beginning of it, go ahead and plan for it. Make it part of your plan because if it's not, if the requirements relax now, it's still going to come. So it makes sense to plan for it now while you're already in your transition phase.
And so, what are these security features? So, Credential Card, which is the optional one, it's Microsoft Defender. So basically, this uses virtualization based security or VBS, and this isolates and protects secrets. Kind of to block things like pass the hash or pass the ticket attacks. Again, this one is the optional one, but some choose to use this as an extra security layer. But the first one is going to be UEFI. So when you see a lot on platforms, they'll have either legacy boot or they'll have UEFI. And so like Windows 10 can boot with legacy boot, but Windows 11 is going to require UEFI. And this is basically that BIOS piece, that interacting between the OS and the hardware or the hypervisor, allowing them to use the advanced security features like secure boot. So to be able to use secure boot, you have to have UEFI first. So that's the base. And then secure boot, basically that tells you that what I'm booting is trusted. And there's been no unauthorized software in the system from taking control when that device boots. And then I talked about TPM, which is the physical trusted platform module, but then we have VTPM, which is the virtual one. So it's an emulation of that physical one. It's in software. So when you get into virtualizing these workloads, as long as the hypervisor supports VTPM and allows you to assign that to those virtual machines, then you are able to virtualize those Windows 11 workloads that require it.
Yeah, and to that point, like when we talk about acquisition costs, I mean, you may have some data center equipment that is a couple years old that doesn't have a physical TPM because we're doing this in software. We can still support that workload. Whereas those physical endpoints, you may not have that option. And again, you know, Microsoft may relax that requirement, but at some point in time, that's going to be a hard and fast requirement. So you will have to replace that device. Maybe not in the immediate term, but at least in the short term. So the fact that we can make these changes and support these features in software, again, gives you more flexibility and options as to how you roll this out and where you leverage this.
So why not Nutanix, or sorry, why Nutanix for virtualizing Windows 11? So for those of you who aren't familiar with Nutanix, we are a hyper-converged infrastructure, HCI. So we're combining that compute, storage, networking into a single platform. We do have our own enterprise-grade hypervisor, Nutanix AHV. We also support other hypervisors as well, which when customers come to Nutanix, they may stay on those, or at that time migrate over time. But AHV does support all those security features that we talked about. So we do have VTPM, we have secure boot, we have the UEFI option, and we also support credential guard as well. And then we do have hybrid multi-cloud capability. So I mentioned our Nutanix cloud clusters, or NC2 for short. That allows you to extend your environment when you need that extra capacity, whether it's for bursting or for disaster recovery. And then our platform, we do have built-in disaster recovery. So we have integrated replication, we have snapshots, we have where we can cover against data loss as well, and we also integrate with third-party backup vendors as well. We do support things like self-service restore. So if there's some kind of file, they can do that. But that time to recover in case of an issue is all built into our platform.
Yeah, and that's on top of all of the underlying tech that makes that has been the platform for EUC workloads as far as how it optimizes storage, gives the performance for that end user experience as well. So like this would be the management on top of that, how you as IT can efficiently manage the Windows 11. And then we also have all of the underlying technology and features and performance that give the end user the positive experience that we need to make sure that they've got.